We're honored to have Ken Rhee join us today. Ken is speaking to us from China and serves as the executive director of the Urban Land Institute for mainland China. Based in Shanghai since 2003, Ken runs his own investment advisory business, the Wuhan Advisory, primarily advising local Chinese developers on raising financing and foreign investors and developers on investing in mainland China. Hello, Ken. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Where do I find you today?
I'm in Shanghai.
When we look at what's happened over this last year, certainly, and there's hopeful lessons that we've observed and maybe even adopted during this period of time. When you look over the landscape of China and the industry that is so robust in that space, what do you see are some observed lessons from this period and things that we have adopted?
Right. I may have the dates wrong, but I think it was January 23rd of last year that the Chinese government decided to quarantine the city of Wuhan, where COVID-19 first started. In fact, 2 days later, I flew out to Atlanta, Georgia, to have a business meeting, and when I came back, when I was trying to come back, my return flight got canceled, and I had to work very hard to get a return flight to return to Shanghai. I think it was around February 7th, 8th or so, and I could see that the whole city was in a lockdown situation then. And it was not more than a couple weeks or so that people started going back to work in person in Shanghai. And I think things went back to normalcy, I would say by mid-March, late March in Shanghai, with students being able to go back to school in person around April or May. And in fact, I think the lockdown of Wuhan got lifted around that time as well. So China was able to get back to normalcy pretty quickly, although it was where COVID-19 first started. And so I think the lessons learned from that was that it is very, very important that you have a very strong, well-orchestrated response from the government to something like pandemic, and also the importance of the people to really follow the rules. Everyone wore masks right away, and I think that was the key reason why China was able to come out of COVID-19 pandemic so fast with limited impact on their economy overall. So with that as a background, I think the biggest lesson learned for me is that when you have a very large urban environments with millions of people living together, it's very, very important that you have a strong government or governance, I should say, and with people being able to respond appropriately. So when COVID-19 happened, the Chinese government rolled out a number of technology-based ways to control COVID-19. One, I think the most obvious one is the health code. So people had a QR code in their smartphone, so that when you enter into a building, you need to display your QR code, your health status. And so if you had been to a city like Wuhan, where there were a lot of infection cases, then your health code status would be red, which meant that you cannot enter into subway stations or buildings and so on. In fact, you need to be quarantined in your own home. So I think that really worked well. And for cities, I think they need to take advantage of technologies like QR codes, smartphones, and so on to control the spread of the virus. Now, other lessons I learned, I think, were observations I learned, is that if you look at the initial cluster cases of COVID-19 in Korea. They happened in crowded churches. And these churches were, I don't think they were designed to be church buildings like the US style church buildings with a very tall ceiling and so on. In fact, they were mainly in office buildings with low ceiling. And in fact, I wrote an article for Urban magazine on my observation or analysis of how the largest initial cluster concentrated in this church called Shincheonji in the city of Daegu could have happened. And just looking at the photos and understanding the dimensions of the inside of the building, it was very obvious to me that despite having hundreds of people sitting next to each other or kneeling down on the floor next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, they had very limited fresh air into the space, and that place represented about half of the infection cases in Korea in the early few months. So it's very important that you have enough fresh air in buildings. So I think people didn't quite understand the building science. So I think that contributed to the rapid spread of COVID-19 in Korea, and I'm sure in other places too that we just didn't know. And but what was comforting is that there were no known infection cases in crowded subway trains or buses, because I think presumably because they were very well insulated. I'll say ventilated, right? Yeah. So whether it's Hong Kong or China or Seoul, at least I'm not aware of any COVID-19 infection cases that occurred inside subways. Mm-hmm. So in fact, there is a very famous case of a cluster infection that happened in a call center in a building next to a crowded, heavily trafficked subway station in Seoul. And I think there were about 100 plus people that were infected that were working in this very crowded call center. And there was a lot of concern about whether those people might have infected passengers in the subway system. And there were no such cases. So, which was a relief, right? And then, in fact, there was no, and then there was initial concern about maybe infecting people who use the same elevators and so on, and there was no such case. So, so when you have good ventilation with people wearing masks, I think it, substantially, significantly reduced the risk of infection. So. I think having proper air ventilation in public transportation was a key to the prevention of the spread of COVID-19 in cities in Asia. So
let me jump in there for a second. I think it is interesting to know how robust the Chinese government moved in a public health emergency to immediately implement new technology, enforcement. And most likely the Chinese people were very peer pressuring with one another. Hey, get safe, this kind of. And you didn't see this American phenomenon where everybody thinks that they're an expert and they're coming up with their own definition of science. Everyone pretty much followed the strong communication that came through the public health agencies, and that honestly was remarkable to watch that. Did you notice that same level of rigor around public health in what was going on in South Korea as well?
Yeah, I think South Korea also did very well in terms of preventing the spread of COVID-19. And although I live in Shanghai, I'm actually, I was born and raised in Korea, and I have a lot of friends in Korea. So I pay a lot of attention to what was going on in Korea. And yes, I think there was a lot of awareness, public awareness of what to do. And I think most people wore masks, from the start. But the wearing of masks was something that was very very much normal in North Asian countries like Japan, Korea, and China. So when you feel like you're having a cold, then you wear a mask right away, right, to avoid infecting other people. So wearing mask has been a common thing for us in North Asia. So I think that also contributed.
I remember years ago, decades ago, I was in Tokyo, and very large city, very much like a New York City in comparison. And in New York, people would stand on the corners and hand you leaflets to come to this show or to come to this thing. What was so remarkable was watching people pass out little Kleenex packages, which was interesting, with advertisement on them, so tissues. And then when I got on the subway, exactly, I saw people with masks on. So I asked, what's happening here? And it's the opposite. And instead of trying to protect myself, I'm trying to protect you. And that whole dynamic of social responsibility, that I'm responsible to society. I mean, Ken, you've been in and out of the United States. I think you even did some of your education here over the years. But being over in China and watching from across that space back at the United States and all the silly confusion that we had, how do the Chinese take that in when they see us arguing about whether it's right or wrong to wear a mask in and out? But any commentary on that?
That's a very good question. I think, again, in North Asia, people have been wearing masks for decades, right? So when COVID-19 happened, for them to wear a mask, it didn't take much of a persuasion. So I could see how in the US, culturally, it might have been difficult for some people to accept. So there are some cultural differences, and I think U.S. is a great country, with great qualities, and people being pretty expressive of their thinkings is, I think, one of the things that makes the U.S. special. So you cannot have everything, So yes, you have some people who may disagree with, what you think is so obvious, but that's the U.S., I guess.
Sometimes our greatest strengths are our greatest weaknesses, in a way, when turned in another context. So we look at the greater built environment, which we've been watching all last year as China just continued to grow and blow and go, as I call it. Changes? Do we see any permanent changes that are resulting from the pandemic in the way that we operate, not only as an industry, but maybe even the way the country is behaving or operating at this time? And I'm talking not about temporary changes, because we all have those, but maybe this was a very major change. Certainly in the United States, we're seeing a series of what we predict to be some permanent changes in the way that people congregate in the future, the way we go to school, even the argument about to go to work or still stay in a virtual context for forever. We're seeing a lot of movements in permanent changes. How about on your side? What are you observing on that?
Right. Well, ULI had a number of events or seminars on this topic, actually, I guess for the last 12 months or so. And I think the basic, common understanding now is that there has not been any new particular trend or change that we're seeing. What we are seeing is acceleration of trends that we were seeing prior to COVID-19, right? So we're talking about the adoption of technologies, the acceleration of e-commerce, the migration from offline retail sales to online sales. That has accelerated tremendously. And then that also started or caused a explosion in the delivery industry, right? Logistics, and now you're seeing people delivering goods all the time. Staying in my home on a weekday, I may have 3-4 deliveries made, including food and books and what have you. So I think, and a lot of the buildings, or I guess residential complexes, were not built or built with all these deliveries in mind. So I know even in Seoul and China, of course, delivering those goods to the final destination, to the home, could be cumbersome and not so efficient. So I think architects and developers need to think about how to make the deliveries easier, more efficient. I think there is a lot of emphasis. There is a lot of emphasis on using technologies in managing buildings now. So the Chinese government has been emphasizing building information modeling (BIM) for a number of years. And whereas before, I think people were talking about smart buildings, now we're talking about smart cities or smart neighborhoods. Instead of BIM, they're talking about CIM, as in city information modeling. So I think that'll be that'll be something that that developers will see more and more.
Back to your statement earlier about the air movement within the subway systems,
right,
and the constraints of air movement in that particular example in the Korean church. We are watching here in the United States that really the mechanical engineers are becoming heroes in this case, because buildings, though we've had good engineering within our buildings for years, it really never contemplated this type of condition, to tell the truth. And so I think that there is a tremendous rise in the science, the building science of how air moves and how systems are designed into the future. Number one. Number two is that buildings must, by and large, become much more adaptable and changeable. Often in our context, we have buildings, they're for one use, and that's it. And those days are starting to move, where buildings have multiple uses. You're seeing the same thing, I'm guessing, in your theater as well.
We are. In fact, remodeling of old buildings is becoming very, very important. And because of the way they were designed and built, there's a lot of wastage happening when you remodel buildings. And so we're seeing new businesses where they actually use modular building technology to do interior fit out of office buildings, such that when the tenant moves out and a new one comes, you could actually change the configuration of the office space with little wastage.
Fantastic. Well, that's great environmentally. It's great from a labor standpoint. There are many, many benefits to that. And maybe that is a permanent change.
I think that'll be a permanent change, yes. The way people, I guess, do internal fit outs of office buildings, even retail shopping centers, I think. We're seeing investors in the F&B space, where they actually provide the facility for cooking and operation, and in case a tenant decides to move out, then someone else can move in without having to waste all the kitchen appliances and so on, which actually happens a lot, right? So we're seeing new business models where that are designed to, I guess, allow for the reusage of old building materials and appliances and so on.
Extraordinary. Economically, how is the country doing? Is there a high consumer confidence at this point? And what is your read on the economy at this point?
Well, it's amazing. I think I've been to two cities, Shenzhen. I mean, I actually went to Shenzhen about 3 weeks ago, and then just a few days ago, I went to Hangzhou. And it's just amazing how vibrant these two cities were, right? When I visited. And of course, they are technology hubs of China, along with Beijing and Shanghai and Wuhan and Chengdu. And the amount of wealth that you see is amazing. The amount of development that is going on in those two cities is just amazing. So, and I would say Shanghai is also very vibrant. And I'm not an economist, so I don't really know how each segment of the society is doing. I bet there are people who are not doing as well because of COVID-19. But on the surface, at least, it seems pretty vibrant to me.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to see in almost every area in the United States. Mm-hmm. We're seeing a few of the sectors really rebounding and coming back, while others are just still. They're just not moving at all. These economies, the United States and China, are of such consequence. They're so large that they don't turn on a dime. It's like turning a very slow ship to watch things move. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to come out of it overnight. It takes a bit of time for the reemergence of economies. And as we watch that, of course, the built environment industry, inclusive of the entire urban context, will emerge from this. Right. And our hope is that we're emerging smarter, that we will put away old bad habits, and that we will adopt a new set of mind for going into the future. Yeah,
Dave, I think I want to bring up something that I think just came to my mind. That is, how you mentioned demographics and different segments and so on. In the real estate industry in China, a lot of the construction, a lot of manual work has been done by people in their 40s and 50s. And say 20, 30 years ago, when there was limited technology, the Chinese industry, especially the construction industry, relied on human labor. Yep. But now with the younger generation becoming more educated and less willing to do the hard manual labor, the construction industry is becoming more automated, more technologically savvy, right? So I was just meeting with a friend of mine yesterday who does window cleaning with using robots.
Wow.
Yeah. So you have all these, tall buildings in China, and you don't see a lot of people in their 20s and 30s willing to, getting the air to clean the windows anymore. And so there's a huge need for automation of building operation and so on, and also construction. So yeah. That'll be a permanent change.
It will. And we put out a forecast, a foresight report back in February. And two of the things that we believe are on a radical escalation is prefabrication and the assembly of buildings, as opposed to the construction of buildings. They're almost like Legos. Over time, they're going to be assembled, and which is critical. And on the design side is the radical escalation of algorithmic design.
Right.
That's AI empowered, machine learning empowered. It's teaching us better. It's not just for nice iterations. It's literally to choose the right iteration and accelerate forward. And I'm sure that you're seeing that in your space as well.
Yes, we are. The Chinese government has been really promoting BIM, I would say about 7-8 years ago. Yeah. And a lot of the professors, in fact, in leading universities, learned about BIM in the US, actually, such as Georgia Tech.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I was talking with a professor who is a pretty senior professor at Tongji University, and his department covers building science and including BIM. And so I asked him, so how did you get trained on BIM? And he said, well, I spent a semester at Georgia Tech. a number of years ago. So a lot of the Chinese professors get trained in the U.S., come back, and then they actually share what they learn with government officials. In fact, professors play a very important role of influencing government policies. So I think the Chinese government has learned has I think accepted the usefulness of BIM, and they've been promoting BIM quite aggressively. And now, however, the way BIM has been implemented in China has not really resulted in better collaboration among the different, types of professionals in the design and construction and building management processes. So the way, for instance, the way they do BIM modeling is all the drawings would be done up to construction drawings in CAD, and the architect would, or the architecture firm would send it to some BIM shop, BIM consultant to do a Revit modeling based on the CAD drawings. So there is no collaboration. It's all the benefits of collaboration that BIM can generate by having different players get involved in the design process from the start. That all of that is gone. But now I think that is changing. So what I'm seeing is now professionally trained architects and planners are being hired by state-owned enterprises, state-owned governments that are in charge of doing large-scale land planning. And so they understand BIM, right? They use BIM. So I think we're seeing more and more collaborative use of BIM. So I think that should bring improvements.
What's the next level of maturity along the scale, isn't it? And so let me ask, are we going to see you back over here in the United States in Atlanta anytime in this coming year?
I hope so. Hopefully in the second half of this year. So, but it really depends on you guys.
Overall conditions and all of those things. Well, we hope that things settle by that time. And if you're coming back through Atlanta, I want to make sure that we get some time together. Ken, thank you for taking this time with us. And it's been very meaningful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave.
All the best. Bye-bye.
All right.